What if the universe is not a chaotic accident, not a cosmic dice throw, but a precise design that was always meant to be noticed by the ones who pay attention? Pause for a moment and let that question land. Most people walk through life thinking patterns are just coincidences, shapes are just shapes, and beauty is a meaningless extra dressing on top of existence. They look at a flower, but they never notice the geometry of the petals. They see the shell of a snail, but they never question why it curls the way it does. They admire the dome of a cathedral, but they never ask why ancient builders consistently lean towards circles, arcs, triangles, and repeating ratios. But a few do, and those few have always seen something the rest ignore. Hidden inside the architecture of reality, there is a language that does not need sound. It's not written in alphabets, it's written in proportions. It's not spoken through words, it's spoken through shape. It has been there long before anyone learned how to read. And yet every culture that ever rose to prominence felt drawn toward it. This is what we call sacred geometry. But before we go further, I want to be very clear. We're not talking about superstition. This isn't about decorating temples and mandalas because it looks nice. This is far older than religion. It is older than language. It is older than mathematics in the formal sense. This is the quiet foundation behind both science and spirituality, behind both engineering and mysticism, and perhaps behind consciousness itself. This is shape as intelligence, form as instruction, patterns as silent memory. If this sounds poetic, then ironically, it's still too small. Because once you truly see what these shapes represent, you will struggle to unsee them ever again. They appear everywhere. They appear in ancient architecture. They appear in crop formations. They appear in the organization of atoms. They appear in the spirals of galaxies. They appear in the proportions of the human body. And they appear in the symmetry of living organisms that grow without any human guidance. The ancient world did not invent these patterns. They simply paid attention to them. That is the real difference. And when you start paying attention as well, you begin to realize something unsettling and also unbelievably inspiring. The universe draws itself with geometry. Let's start at one of the most famous patterns that shows up almost everywhere in ancient records, the flower of life. At first glance, it is a simple cluster of circles. Symmetrical, balanced, centered. But look at it a little longer, and a strange thing begins to occur. You notice that every curve is the exact radius of the next. Each circle is born inside the circumference of another. The intersections construct hexagrams, six-fold symmetry, star shapes, and hidden polygon forms, as if nature is sketching a blueprint in layered code. And this is not a random doodle. This exact shape is carved into the Temple of Osiris in Egypt, thousands of years old. It appears in ancient Kabbalistic diagrams. It appears in Islamic art. It appears in Hindu mandalas. It appears inside ancient Phoenician pieces. Different continents, different eras, different cultures, all arrived at this same pattern, not by copying each other. They didn't have WhatsApp groups and design Pinterest boards. They noticed the same cosmic signature. The flower of life is not just pretty. It is instruction. It contains within it the seed of life, the egg of life. And through further geometric expansion, the patterns that mirror cell division in early embryonic development. The earliest phase of biological growth follows the same geometry. A human embryo at its first cellular divisions matches this pattern. Ancient scribes could not view cell division under a microscope. They had no electron imaging, yet they portrayed the same proportions that life uses to multiply itself. How? Let's step deeper. Before the flower of life is formed, there is the vesica piscis, two circles overlapping at precise proportion, creating a pointed oval in the middle. That almond shape, if extended through horizontal rotation, becomes the framework that produces the equal-armed cross, the triangle, the square, and all the classical Platonic roots. If you rotate that same geometry in 3 dimensions, it becomes the basis for spheres, toruses, symmetric polyhedra, and structures that later inspired quantum physicists when visualizing spatial relationships in atomic organization. This is not a matter of belief. It's a matter of proportion. This is the universal ruler. The Vesica Piscis is also found in early Christian art and medieval stained glass windows. Architects used it to determine placement of arches because the proportion ratio is self-consistent. It creates symmetry automatically, and that symmetry feels satisfying to the human nervous system. When we walk into a cathedral with a perfect arc that's based on these proportions, we don't need an explanation. The body reacts on its own. It feels right. Some call that aesthetic preference. Others would say we're waking up to a forgotten memory inside the structure of the body itself. And here's where the challenge begins. Are these patterns simply the byproduct of physics and numbers? Or are the numbers themselves a language left behind by the intelligence that structured existence? Be careful before you answer too fast. If it was random design, then why do independent civilizations across the world separated by oceans, separated by language, separated by culture end up drawing the same shapes and using them in their temples, calendars, and symbolic systems? Why did they all treat geometry as sacred? Why did they embed it in their architecture, not just as decoration, but as framework? And why does this matter now? Because in modern times, most of us have stopped noticing patterns. We stare at screens more than landscapes. We scroll more than observe. We take pictures instead of allowing nature to imprint us. We have forgotten how to see form. And in that forgetting, we also drifted away from the silent code that nature uses to construct everything. Sacred geometry is only mystical to the person who has lost their attention span. To someone in ancient India, Egypt, Greece, or even early Tibet, this was not mysticism. It was science. It was the mathematics of growth. It was the language of God, but not in the religious sense, more like the architecture of universal consciousness, shaping matter into form. Most people also don't know this. The philosophy schools in ancient Greece used geometry, not just for architecture and mathematics, but as mental training. To study the circle was to study eternity. To study the triangle was to study fundamental separation. 1 becomes 2 becomes 3. To study the square was to study the physical plane. To study the pentagon was to study life itself, because the pentagonal proportions contain the ratio we now call phi, also known as the Golden Ratio. That number, phi, is not arbitrary. It is the same proportional growth ratio used by flower petal arrangements, leaf branching angles, the curl of a ram's horn, spiral galaxies, and the proportions of the human forearm to hand. You will see more of phi in part 2 when we move into nature's hidden code. But in ancient schools, geometry was a spiritual path. Not because they were worshipping shapes, but because they recognized where the shapes were coming from, the same way a musician understands chords, not by worshipping strings, but by understanding vibration. The idea was simple. If the human mind can understand the structure of shapes, it can understand the structure of creation. And once you understand structure, then consciousness is no longer an accident. And if consciousness is no longer an accident, then creation is no longer random. This was the missing bridge between mystic and mathematician. And ironically, that bridge is now resurfacing. Today we have physicists talking about fabric, symmetry groups, holographic principles, fractals, information fields, and spatial frequencies as the underlying scaffold of reality. They are using complicated equations, but at the bottom of those equations are patterns, proportions, angles, fractal recurrence, and geometric consistency. Science is catching up to what ancient geometry was already pointing at. Nature does not guess. Nature organizes. Nature repeats proportion ratios over and over because proportion is the way consciousness expresses coherence in form. So here's the challenge for you as the viewer. If the universe is designed through geometry, then how much of your inner experience is also being shaped by patterns you never consciously noticed? Think about all the times you've walked into a building and instantly felt calm without knowing why. Or the times you felt uneasy in a space that had sharp angles, broken symmetry, or distortion in layout. We tend to think those reactions are emotional, but in reality, the nervous system is intelligent enough to detect proportional harmony and proportional disharmony. The mind is not separate from form, the mind responds to form. This is why sacred architecture around the world feels peaceful before you even interpret it. Our nervous system recognizes coherent geometry intuitively. We don't need to read a label. We don't need a theory. We simply feel balanced or imbalanced, which leads to a startling realization. Geometry does not only shape matter. Geometry shapes mood. If matter and mood are both influenced by form, then consciousness and creation are not separate domains. They are reflections of each other. The ancient builders knew this. That's why temples were not just places of worship. They were calibrating chambers. You enter, and the geometry interacts with your senses, clarifies your mind, aligns your breath, and invites you into presence. This is why ancient structures still affect tourists who don't even believe in spirituality. The temples are not working through belief. They are working through proportion. This is the part most modern people don't understand. Sacred geometry does not need belief. It is not ideological. It is structural. Belief is optional. Geometry is inevitable. You can refuse to believe in phi. The sunflower still grows in phi spiral. You can reject the vesica piscis. Your cells still divide according to the ratio within it. You can pretend the flower of life is superstition. Your embryonic development still mirrored its formation pattern. Geometry does not care whether you approve. It is simply the blueprint through which things are built. So if you are watching this right now, maybe this is a moment to slow down and start paying attention in a different way. Not to live in the abstract world of theory and debate, but to start noticing form in the real world. Next time you look at a flower, look at the arrangement of petals. Next time you eat a pineapple, notice the repeating diamond tiling. Next time you look at a pine cone, observe the spiral count in opposite directions. Geometry is not only for architects. It is the universal alphabet. And you already know it in your bones, you simply forgot. Before we close this first part, I want to offer you a simple practice for the next 24 hours. When you look at anything naturally grown, a plant, a leaf, a fruit, a shell, pause and look at it as if you are looking at a message. Trace the curves. Count the repeating shapes. Notice the symmetry and the angles. Do not overanalyze it. Just observe as if you are witnessing intention in physical form. When you do this, the world suddenly feels less random, and reality begins to feel alive again, not in a childish fantasy way, but as if there is memory behind matter, intelligence behind structure, and intention behind the patterns that surround you. You are not separate from the geometry of creation. You are inside it. You are shaped by it. Your body is built with it. Your brain interprets the world through it. And once you start noticing, you will never fully return to the old way of seeing. This is the first step. The language was always here. The question is, are you ready to read it? We continue in part 2 with nature's hidden code. Until then, hold this reflection gently. If geometry is the silent architecture of existence, then what is the universe trying to show you through form, and have you been ignoring the message all this time? What if the universe is not speaking in sentences or paragraphs, but speaking in proportion? What if every leaf, every spiral, every snowflake, every shell is a silent sentence in a mathematical language that no one taught you, and yet your subconscious understands it more than you realize? Think about your daily life. You look at a tree. You notice the branches. You notice the angles. You notice the way the limbs divide. Maybe you think it's just random growth, but look closely. A tree doesn't grow branches in chaos. It grows in sequence. It grows in ratio. It grows according to a pattern that nature repeats everywhere. The Fibonacci sequence, where each number is the sum of the two before it. It's not just a cute numerical curiosity. It shows up in plant growth, the structure of the human body, the curvature of storms, and the arms of galaxies. It's not metaphor, it's patterned behavior. And this pattern is not regional. It's global. Nature is not improvising. Nature is consistent. Look at the spiral of a sunflower. The seeds arrange themselves in intersecting spirals that match Fibonacci numbers. Look at the chambers of a nautilus shell. They grow proportionally following the same ratio. Look at hurricanes from satellite images. They mimic the same golden spiral. Now look at spiral galaxies, billions of stars curving around a center, the same layout. From micro to macro, from tiny shells to cosmic spirals that stretch across millions of light years. The same shape, the same proportion. How could that be random? Nature has no corporate board, no design department, no invention patent office, and yet it keeps selecting the same geometry repeatedly because that geometry is the most efficient way to distribute energy through space. It's almost as if life is engineered, not in the sci-fi alien lab sense. Engineered meaning there is structure behind growth rather than improvisation. But here's the twist: humans were never meant to be separate from this pattern. We are shaped by it. Look at your finger bones. Look at the length from fingertip to knuckle, then knuckle to wrist. Same ratio. Look at your arm from elbow to shoulder and elbow to wrist. Same ratio again. This is not coincidence. The human body expresses golden proportion. Even your face, the spacing of your eyes, the width of the mouth, the length of the nose approximate phi in subtle ways that influence what we perceive as aesthetically pleasing. You don't need to know mathematics to sense harmony. Your nervous system does it automatically. This is why people instantly feel calm when confronted with symmetry in nature, not because they memorize numbers, but because the brain recognizes order. And here's something even more interesting. When people look at certain geometric proportions, especially golden ratio curves, the brain's reward center activates. It's not philosophical. It's neurological. Your brain knows these patterns. Even if you've never heard the phrase sacred geometry before this video, your biology has already been reading it all your life. Every time you felt a strange sense of awe while watching ocean waves, while staring at the spiral of a fern, while tracing the shape of a seashell, you were responding to the architecture of existence. Sacred geometry is not a belief system. It is a biological recognition system. We do not believe in spirals. We come from spirals. We do not believe in patterns. We are built by patterns. We do not believe in order. We live inside order. Now let's talk about something even more personal. Your DNA, the double helix spiral, is structured in a geometry that echoes the same proportions. The shape of the helix follows symmetric ratios that match fractal scaling principles found elsewhere in nature. And in laboratories, researchers have noticed that certain geometric patterns influence the way energy fields stabilize or destabilize around objects. People don't need to know physics to feel the difference. Certain spaces soothe you, others drain you. Nature's geometry affects energy flow. Whether you call it prana, ki, biofield, or electromagnetic coherence, the name you prefer doesn't matter. The pattern is the pattern, and there is an even deeper implication hiding here. If geometry shapes matter, and matter shapes perception, then perception itself is influenced by geometry, which means the way reality feels to you, the sense of calm, clarity, chaos, pressure, expansion, contraction, might not be purely emotional. Some of it might be geometric. This is why meditative spaces across cultures didn't just have random floor plans. They were built using precise shapes designed to create coherence inside the mind and body. Temples weren't decorated. They were calibrated. The architecture changed consciousness. Sit inside the Pantheon Dome in Rome. The proportions feel balanced even if you don't know why. Stand inside the Great Pyramid. Its slope ratio aligns with phi. Walk through ancient Indian temples. Floors often contain precise yantras based on geometric rules. Geometry induces states. Nature does the same thing. You think trees make you feel peaceful because it's green and natural? But part of the peace is the repetition of fractal proportion. The branching pattern is similar in trunk, branches, twigs, and leaf veins. Layers inside layers. Repetition inside repetition. The brain loves fractal consistency. Modern chaos, cities with random angles, clashing architecture, broken lines everywhere, is not just ugly, it overloads the nervous system. Meanwhile, nature calms the nervous system because it presents geometric repetition at multiple scales. Peace is not an emotional mystery. Peace is a geometric condition. But most people never notice this because they are constantly staring outward, scrolling, reacting, consuming. They forgot to observe. Nature is not quiet because nothing is happening. Nature is quiet because everything is organized. Now, here's the bigger emotional truth behind all of this. We are not overwhelmed because life is stressful. We are overwhelmed because we are living in artificially broken geometry. We are surrounded by straight, hard angles, rectangular screens, concrete cubes, and unnatural proportions that do not match the inner geometry of the body. We built environments that don't match our design, and then we wonder why anxiety is rising. I want to propose something. Maybe a human is not supposed to live in a world of rectangles and straight lines. Straight lines almost never occur in nature. Nature prefers curves. Space-time prefers curves. Energy prefers curves. The human body has no straight lines. And yet, we keep constructing our world in geometry that contradicts the structure of life. It's no wonder modern design feels cold. It's mathematically disconnected from the organic language of existence. So what can you do with this today in a real, practical way? Here's a practice for the next 3 days. When you look at anything natural, a plant, a fruit, your own hand, don't label it. Observe shape. Observe proportion. Observe recurrence. Instead of thinking leaf, notice branching. Instead of thinking shell, notice curve. Instead of thinking tree, notice spirals. If you train your eyes this way, the world becomes absolutely different. Suddenly, everything looks intentional. Suddenly, life stops feeling random. Suddenly, nature becomes a library, and every object becomes a page inside a cosmic manual. And as you observe this, you will notice something else awakening. Your sense of belonging. Your sense of alignment. Your sense that you are not surviving inside the universe, you are participating inside a design. Part 2 is not just information, it is a mirror, a reminder, a gentle nudge back toward the memory that the body never forgot. Before we move to Part 3, where we discuss how geometry influences human consciousness, architecture, environments, and the possibility that we are co-designers of reality, hold this reflection. If nature is speaking through geometry, then maybe the question was never, does the universe care about us? Maybe the real question is, have we forgotten how to listen? Part 3 will begin exactly where this leaves off. Are you ready to explore how geometry might be shaping not only matter, but your thoughts, your emotions, and your very sense of self? We've reached the place where this stops being an idea and begins becoming personal. Because up until now, we spoke about sacred geometry as if it's something out there, in temples, in shells, in galaxies, in fractals, in pine cones. But what if the biggest revelation is this? Geometry is not something outside of you. You are geometry. Your nervous system isn't separate from the shapes of nature, it is formed by them. Your perception isn't separate from the mathematical structure of reality, it is supported by it. Your thoughts aren't floating abstractions, they're patterns firing through neural arrangements that are geometric and rhythmic. This changes everything. Because if you are built from geometry, then your interaction with the world is not just emotional or psychological. It's structural. What you call intuition may partly be your geometry reading external geometry. What you call good vibes or bad vibes may partly be your internal geometry responding to spatial coherence or spatial disorder. This is where architects, painters, musicians, sculptors, ancient mystics, and modern physicists accidentally meet, not because they believe the same thing, but because they are interacting with the same underlying pattern. Humans instinctively apply sacred geometry without realizing it. Think about the last time you saw a building that felt peaceful the moment you entered. You didn't need a lecture on harmony. You didn't need to calculate phi ratios. Your body already knew. Think about the most iconic structures in human history, places people still travel across oceans to stand inside. The Pantheon, the Great Pyramid, the Taj Mahal, Chartres Cathedral, Mayan pyramids. We don't travel there because they are old. We travel there because they hold coherent shape. The geometry inside them is so stable that it stabilizes the nervous system. You don't need to believe sacred geometry is real for the effect to occur. Your body reacts anyway. People report feeling clarity, calm, presence, connection. Not because of stories, because the proportions trigger alignment. This means something bold. Physical space shapes inner state. Which means inner state is not only emotional, it's architectural. Now look around at the modern world we built. How much of it honors geometry? How much of it echoes phi? How much of it carries fractal curvature? Very little. Most of the modern world is straight edges, right angles, linear grids, industrial repetition, phones, skyscrapers, desks, traffic signals, all rectangles, all blocks, all sharp division. We built a technological grid, but we forgot to integrate the language of nature inside it. No wonder we feel like our minds are glitching. We created physical environments that contradict the geometry of life. And then we wonder why our mental and emotional balance collapses. You can't nourish a biological system inside mechanical geometry and expect harmony. So here's the huge shift. Sacred geometry is not nostalgia. It is instruction. It shows us what a human-friendly world looks like. It shows us patterns that help energy flow instead of fragment. It shows us how to build spaces that support clarity instead of distortion. Imagine if entire cities were designed around organic curves rather than right angles. Imagine if schools placed children in circular learning halls instead of rectangular boxes. Imagine if hospitals used geometries that calm the nervous system instead of sterile grids. Imagine if workplaces were designed like gardens rather than factory like cubes. Human consciousness would not collapse under pressure as quickly. Stress would change. Breathing would change. Decision-making would change. Creativity would flourish. We think peace requires meditation techniques. Half of the battle is geometry. Now let's bring this even closer inside your personal daily life. The shapes you surround yourself with matter. The symmetry in your environment matters. The curves you choose to look at or ignore matter. Even the way you arrange your room, place furniture, draw lines, or decorate your space influences your internal state. Your room is not just your room. Your room is a geometric field, and you are inside it. So here's something extremely practical. Before the next 48 hours pass, change one small area of your environment in a way that introduces more natural geometry. It could be placing a plant near your desk. It could be adding a seashell on your shelf. It could be arranging objects in circular clusters instead of rigid rows. It could be placing a spiral form somewhere in your visual field. You don't need theory, just one small geometric reminder. Your mind will notice. Not instantly, but subtly. Consciousness begins to shift when structure shifts. This is not magic. This is perception architecture. Now let's go to the final realization, the most important one. Sacred geometry is not just about understanding the universe. It's about remembering that you are part of the design. When you see spirals in nature and feel something inside you soften, that's not poetic metaphor. That is recognition. That is memory. That is the structure of your biology responding to its own origin. You are not a random background character in the cosmos. You are a repeating pattern inside the same pattern that grows galaxies. You are not separate from the universe. You are a fractal expression of the universe. This is why ancient traditions said, the macrocosm is reflected in the microcosm. It wasn't philosophy. It was geometry. When you understand this, even a little something incredible begins inside you. You stop feeling like life is happening to you, and you start feeling like you are participating with life, not controlling it, not forcing it, participating. Like a musician joining a melody, like a dancer joining a rhythm, like a drop of water joining the ocean, not dissolving, but completing the pattern it always belonged to. This is not escape. This is remembrance. So here's the closing message I want to leave you with. You don't need to memorize formulas. You don't need to become a scholar. You don't need to believe anything. All you have to do is start seeing the world as pattern instead of chaos. Start noticing proportion instead of noise. Start observing shape instead of labels. And slowly the world that once felt random will begin to feel intentional. You will begin to sense order where others see disorder. And you will live with a different emotional posture, not as someone lost inside a meaningless universe, but as someone who is part of a design that began long before you were born. Before we end, let this question echo inside your thoughts. Now that you've seen that geometry is not just a visual property, but the silent architecture behind matter, perception, and consciousness itself, what kind of world do you want to help shape from this point forward?